Breaking news today: Africa, Russia, Putin, and Wagner. The re-emergence of Russia as a major geopolitical player in Africa has alarmed the West, especially in light of Russia's ongoing military conflict with Ukraine. Prior to and following Moscow's invasion of Ukraine, Russia's engagement with Africa was guided by three principles: the pursuit of alternative economic partnerships, the acquisition of geopolitical leverage, and the promotion of a multipolar world order. The multipolar world, in which developing countries like Africa feel they have not been represented or respected enough, is the most relevant in bringing Russia and the continent together, in contrast to the unipolar world led undisputedly by the United States. The normative vision of a multipolar world held by African countries and Russia is one in which the voices of underrepresented African nations are heard and great powers such as Russia have a place at the table. This sentiment was voiced by Vladimir Putin in 2019 at the Russia-Africa Summit in Sochi, where he said, "African states are confidently gaining political and economic weight, affirming themselves as one of the important pillars of the multipolar world order, and are taking an increasingly important part in working out international community's decisions on key issues related to the regional and global agenda. This will allow us to increase our efforts toward achieving universal peace and creating a more equitable global order." Putin has recently been even more outspoken in his embrace of Africa, promising to provide free grain to African countries if the Russia-Ukraine grain deal mediated by the UN and Turkey is not extended. This announcement came during a March 2023 Russia-Africa Parliamentary Conference in Moscow. Putin has forgiven the debts of African countries totaling over $20 billion, €18.3 billion, on occasion. In an effort to find a peaceful resolution to the ongoing war, 6 African leaders from Zambia, Senegal, the Republic of the Congo, Uganda, Egypt, and South Africa will travel to Russia and Ukraine, as announced earlier this month by South African President Cyril Ramaphosa. Since the beginning of the Ukraine war, the Global South component has become more important in Russian foreign policy, as noted by Hannah Knott of the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation in an interview. The responses of African countries to Russia's invasion of Ukraine are another example of the concept of a multipolar order. Only 28 African countries, just over 51%, voted in favor of the resolution condemning its attack on Ukraine at the UN General Assembly in March 2022, compared to 81.29% of non-African countries. 17 African nations were among the 35 that voted no. Only Eritrea of the African nations voted no, while Belarus, Russia, North Korea, and Syria were the others to vote against the resolution. The UN General Assembly voted in April 2022 to remove Russia from the Human Rights Council. 10 African countries voted in favor of suspension, 9 were against, and 35 were either absent or abstained. Russia needs African support to advance its UN initiative, and it will accept abstentions as a last resort if it doesn't get it. Natalia Piskunova, a Russian academic, believes it is just as important, if not more so, to thwart U.S. initiatives at the UN that are harmful to Russia's interest, and not just in Africa. Despite their support for Ukraine's territorial integrity, African countries have no interest in joining the sanctions policy. They see sanctions as an instrument of U.S. unipolarity that has repeatedly marginalized Africa and the Global South and gone against UN norms on sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the use of force. Russia will use the African nation's stance to advocate for a multipolar world in which it is not isolated and the West is not the de facto representative of all nations. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov visited Africa in July 2022 and advocated for a permanent seat for Africa on the United Nations Security Council. Thandi Modise, South Africa's Minister of Defense, traveled to Moscow for an international security conference just days after Blinken landed in his country in August 2022. Russia's commitment to a multipolar world is exemplified by its willingness to work with all 54 African states or the O. Lavrov met with O member state representatives in Ethiopia during his tour of Africa. Western military interventions, such as those in Yugoslavia, 1999, Iraq, 2003, and Libya, 2011, were portrayed as the negative manifestations of a unipolar world by Lavrov in his official statement, in which he criticized U.S. unipolarity and its liberal interventionist approach. Lavrov elaborated on the Russian perspective of the global order and the common values held by Russia and Africa. Without mentioning Ukraine specifically, he said that the United Nations Charter should serve as the basis for the international system. This argument is made in opposition to the concept of a rules-based world order, which is viewed as a Western and American imposition on the rest of the world. The West's notion of order is challenged and the principle of non-interference in a country's internal affairs is promoted by Moscow's cooperation with rogue states ruled by regimes with poor relations with the West. This goes against the principles of liberal internationalism, which hold that the domestic structures of any country can be changed, even by the use of force. Russia may find allies in countries like Zimbabwe, the Central African Republic, and even Sudan occasionally. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa announced, during the BRICS summit, only to be corrected by his party, that South Africa will leave the ICC to avoid arresting Putin, suggesting that the indictment raised against Putin by the International Criminal Court, ICC, might not be enough to disrupt Russia-Africa ties. In light of Poland's close ties to Russia, the South African government has also banned arms exports to the country. Africa's and the Global South's reluctance to join Western sanctions against Russia demonstrates a degree of complementarity in the desire of the two sides to demand a change in the world order that neither Russians nor Africans perceive to be in line with their interest, despite the indictment against Putin and Russia's ongoing war against Ukraine. This is one of the reasons why African governments, despite Western condemnation, will not simply remove the Kremlin's phone number. Wagner leader Yevgeny Prigozhin attempted a military coup this past weekend, but nothing happened. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov stated on Monday, the 26th of June, that the Wagner mercenary group will continue operating in Mali and the Central African Republic despite the group's leaders' failed insurrection over the weekend. They have instructors like Wagner who are working there. This work will continue, of course, Lavrov told the RT news service. Lavrov claimed that Europe, and France in particular, had abandoned the two African nations, prompting them to reach out to Russia and Wagner for military advisors.